The complete works of Swami Vivekananda. Karam Yoga, Chapter 1. Karam, in its effect on the character, Part 1. The word karam is derived from the Sanskrit kri, to do. All action is karam. Technically, this word also means the effects of actions. In connection with metaphysics, it sometimes means the effects, of which our past actions were the causes. But in Karam Yoga, we have simply to do with the word karam meaning work. The goal of mankind is knowledge. That is the one ideal placed before us by Eastern philosophy. Pleasure is not the goal of man, but knowledge. Pleasure and happiness come to an end. It is a mistake to suppose that pleasure is the goal. The cause of all miseries we have in the world is that men foolishly think pleasure to be the ideal to strive for. At a time when man finds that it is not happiness but knowledge towards which he is going, and that both pleasure and pain are great teachers, and that he learns as much from evil as from good. As pleasure and pain pass before his soul, they have upon it different pictures, and the result of these combined impressions is what is called a man's character. If you take the character of any man, it really is but the aggregate of tendencies, the sum total of the bent of his mind. You will find that misery and happiness are equal factors in the formation of that character. Good and evil have an equal share in molding character, and in some instances, misery is a greater teacher than happiness. In studying the great characters of the world, I dare say, in a vast majority of cases, it would be found that it was misery that taught more than happiness. It was poverty that taught more than wealth. It was blows that brought out their inner fire more than praise. Now this knowledge again is inherent in man. No knowledge comes from outside. It is all inside. What we say a man knows should, in strict psychological language, be what he discovers or unveils. What a man learns is really what he discovers by taking the cover off his own soul, which is a mine of infinite knowledge. We say Newton discovered gravitation. Was it sitting anywhere in a corner waiting for him? It was his own mind. The time came and he found it. All knowledge that the world has ever received comes from the mind. The infinite library of the universe is in your own mind. The external world is simply the suggestion, the occasion which sets you to study your own mind. But the object of your study is always your own mind. The falling of an apple gave the suggestion to Newton, and he studied his own mind. He rearranged all the previous links of thought in his mind and discovered a new link for them, which we call the law of gravitation. It was not in the apple nor in anything in the center of the earth. All knowledge, therefore, secular or spiritual, is in the human mind. In many cases, it is not discovered but remains covered. And when the covering is being slowly taken off, we say we are learning. And the advance of knowledge is made by the advance of this process of uncovering. The man from whom this veil is being lifted is the more knowing man. The man upon whom it lies thick is ignorant, and the man from whom it is entirely gone, is all-knowing, omniscient. There have been omniscient men, and I believe there will be yet, and that there will be myriads of them in the cycles to come. Like fire in a piece of flint, knowledge exists in the mind. Suggestion is the friction which brings it out. So with all our feelings and action, our tears and our smiles, our joys and our griefs, our weeping and our laughter, our curses and our blessings, our praises and our blames, every one of these we may find if we calmly study our own selves. To have brought them out from within ourselves by so many blows, the result is what we are. All these blows taken together are called karma, work, action. Every mental and physical blow that is given to the soul, by which, as it were, fire is struck from it, and by which its own power and knowledge are discovered, is karma. This word being used in its widest sense. Thus, we are all doing karma all the time. I am talking to you. This is karma. You are listening. This is karma. We breathe. This is karma. We walk. Karma. Everything we do, physical or mental, is karma, and it leaves its marks on us. There are certain works which are, as it were, the aggregate, the sum total of the large number of smaller works. If we stand near the seashore and hear the waves dashing against the shingle, we think it is such a great noise, and yet we know that one wave is really composed of millions and millions of minute waves. Each one of those is making a noise, and yet we do not catch it. It is only when they become the big aggregate that we hear. Similarly, every pulsation of the heart is work. Certain kinds of work we find are become tangible to us. They are at the same time the aggregate of a number of small works. If you really want to judge the character of a man, look not at his great performances. Every fool may become a hero at one time or the other. Watch a man do the most common of his actions. Those are indeed the things which will tell you the real character of a great man. Great occasions rouse even the lowest of human beings to some kind of greatness. But he alone is really great, whose character is great always, the same wherever he may be. Karma, in its effect on character, is the most tremendous power that man has to deal with. Man, as it were, a center that is attracting all the powers of the universe towards himself, and in this center is fusing them all and then again sending them off in a big current. Such a center is the real man, the Almighty, the Omniscient, and he draws the whole universe towards him. Good and bad, misery and happiness, all are running towards him and clinging round him. And out of them he fashions the mighty stream of tendency called character and throws it on outwards. As he has the power of drawing in anything, so also he has the power of throwing it out. All the actions that we see in the world, all the movements in human society, all the works that we have around us are simply the display of thought, the manifestation of the will of man. Machines or instruments, cities, ships or men of war, all these are simply the manifestation of the will of man. And this will is caused by character, and character is manufactured by karma. As is karma, so is the manifestation of the will. The men of mighty will the world has produced have all been tremendous workers, gigantic souls with wills powerful enough to overturn worlds. wills that they got by persistent work through ages and ages. Such a gigantic will as that of a Buddha or a Jesus could not be obtained in one life, for we know who their fathers were. It is not known that their fathers ever spoke a word for the good of mankind. Millions and millions of carpenters like Joseph had come and gone. Millions are still living. Millions and millions of petty kings like Buddha's fathers had been in the world. If it was only a case of hereditary transmission, how do you account for this petty prince who was not perhaps obeyed by his own servants, producing the son whom half the world worships? How do you explain the gulf between the carpenter and his son, whom millions of human beings worship as God? It cannot be solved by the theory of heredity. The gigantic will Buddha and Jesus threw over the world, whence did it come? Whence came this accumulation of power? It must have been there through ages and ages, continually growing bigger and bigger until it burst on society in a Buddha or a Jesus, even rolling down to the present day.